I think what happens with a lot of men is that they don't have the right knowledge to be good lovers. The idea that we have that you have to be hard for 30 minutes and pump it really hard. And that's actually not at all. The sex education that we have is really deficient.
Do you think men are not caring enough about female pleasure?
Funny that you ask. Actually...
Today's guest on the Guten Tag Podcast is Ana Ornelas, better known as Pimenta Citrica. Ana is an erotic writer, sex educator, and pleasure activist based in Berlin who challenges traditional views on sexuality and gender.
Women's sexuality is treated, it's demonized, but also it's extremely expected. So we're expected to be very, very sexual and sexy, but we're also expected to pretend that that's not our idea.
In this episode, we dive into common misconceptions about pleasure and what it means to be a good lover, how to communicate your kinks and preferences with your partner, Kit Kat and sex-positive parties, and the impact of AI on the adult content industry.
I think that there is this idea of what kink looks like, and especially in Berlin, that's true. It's like this latex, Kit Kat, BDSM, hard play. That's not all that kink is. For a lot of people, they're like, well, I would like to experiment with my sexuality, but I am not into that version of it.
How can I communicate better my sexual desires and preferences more effectively with my partner?
That's a great question.
We want to thank one of our sponsors for supporting this podcast. WonderTax is a platform that makes your tax declaration in Germany easy. Try it out for free and only submit if you're fully satisfied. Visit gutentag.wondertax.de and give it a try. Now, without further ado, let's start with the conversation.
Hello.
Welcome, Ana Pimenta Citrica, to the Guten Tag Podcast.
Thank you.
I want to understand a little bit more. How would you describe pleasure activism? What does that mean? And why should someone pay attention to that?
Well, pleasure activism is not a movement created by me.
Mm-hmm.
It's an existing movement, and it's not only about sexual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
It is about having more pleasure in your life, in all sections of it. And it is especially directed as a form of self-empowerment for people that are less privileged and or oppressed. Because pleasure is a powerful thing. In my case, in the case of my work, the pleasure activism that I do is specifically about sexual pleasure. I think that sex is a huge part of our lives, and when it comes to women in particular, sex is one of the tools that are used to oppress us, to take away our choices. So to be sexually empowered is to regain agency back. And what I mean when I say, this is one of the tools to oppress, it's like a lot of big buzzwords, but on a very fundamental level, our reproductive rights, for instance, are such a big topic, and the way that other people are trying to control our bodies. And on the more philosophical level, we're always being judged on our sexual behavior, lack thereof. These are all points of control, and so our sexuality is weaponized against us. And my work is directed as to give some of the power back to us, and that's what I try to do.
You said that you started to write erotic stories, erotic novels since you were very young. What was your relation with sex when you were younger? Were you always open about it, or what was it?
No. I think that's why I actually do what I do. So I'm from Brazil, which, I mean, you're from Latin America. It's a weird culture, right? really open at the same time, really not open. And I come from a state in Brazil, Minas Gerais, which is very religious, and it is pretty conservative. It was even more when I was a child. Sorry. Yeah, Brazil has changed a lot in the past 20 years or so, but when I was a kid, Catholic guilt was pretty big.
But it's very interesting in Brazil because, for example, you have the carnival where you wear very little clothes. It's very sexy dances, sexy attire, everything. You go to the beach and everyone is wearing a string. But when it comes to sexuality, it tends to be more conservative, or even nudism is like illegal, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure, and everything is very sexualized. So nudity is always sexualized, which is the complete departure from the culture that we have here in Germany. It is a weird culture because, yeah, you're right. On one side, we're pretty open. We're pretty outwardly sexual. On the other hand, we're not, and it is a pretty sexist country. It's getting better, but it used to be pretty bad. So I grew up in the culture that, you know, female sexuality was surrounded by a lot of guilt. I masturbated for the first time when I was 10, and it was a very nice self-discovery moment. But as soon as I kind of learned what it was that I was doing,
Hey, liebe Freunde. Sorry to interrupt this amazing conversation, but I need a little bit of help. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see the subscribe button. If you do, it would mean the world to us if you can subscribe. That's the best way to support the show. Because when you do, I can show it to potential guests and potential brands and stuff like that, and it really helps to grow the show in so many ways. Have cooler conversations, cooler guests, and it just helps in everything so much. So, if you don't mind, thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
I spiraled into deep shame to the point that I would, I would promise to God and pray at night that I would never do it again. And then I would do it again and repent, but, praying or even whip myself with a belt, which is bizarre considering that I was as a child. And I was just curious and sexual from a young age, and I had this split into on one side of myself just being this person, but being surrounded in my real life by a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, so not feeling like I was able to express that. And the way that I found to deal with it was to go into the internet, and on the internet I found a lot of fan fiction. Spicy fan fiction, and this world that was full of erotica. And I wrote a sex scene, the first sex scene that I wrote. I was 12. It was a scene of me having sex with Daniel Radcliffe, not Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe. We're the same age, so it's not that weird. Yeah, and I remember when I did it for the first time, it's just like giving voice, especially because I wrote it from his perspective, and that was very liberating because I could step into a man's shoes and be as sexual as I could without the self-judgment.
But at that age, what did you know about sex? Had you watched porn or something, or how did you know what was sexy or what was like?
I hadn't watched porn. I watched porn pretty late in my life. I read about sex, and I knew, from whispers around school, like what was about.
Yeah.
Reading about it gave me a better idea, and I was able to copy it a little bit. It was a very freeing experience, and I immediately got hooked on it, so I never really stopped. But for a long time, it was a split thing that I had on the internet, completely apart from my personal life.
So none of your friends or anyone knew that you were writing erotic stories?
I mean, I think some of maybe my closest friends knew that I was doing something in that direction.
Yeah.
But, you know, general people at school didn't know. I was going onto forums on the internet. I had a pseudonym, so Pimenta Citrica. And I had a blog as well, which was not like a complete secret, but people didn't know that it was me. So yeah, it was like this online secret identity kind of.
You mentioned also in an interview that you had an experience where you experienced the first time slut shaming at a very young age. Was that also part of what later motivated you to write about sex or like write erotic stories and being a bit liberated or empowered for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aren't we all overcompensating? It's a funny thing with the slut shaming. So the first time I was called a whore, I was 10, and I went to a friend's or classmate's birthday party. And it was the 2000s, and me and my friend decided to put glitter all over our arms, which, you know, questionable fashion choice. But regardless, we did it anyway, and I was feeling pretty good about it until I arrived at the party. And for some reason, that prompted all the kids to call me a whore. And they spent the night calling me that. And it was... Yeah, I felt so ashamed. And it continued to happen, even though I was quite a late bloomer, and I didn't actually have sex until like I was 20. So I wasn't even having sex. But somehow my behavior or something about me prompted people to slut shame me. My theory, now that I'm a grown-up and I can look back at it, is that, you know, slut shaming not always has to do with sexual behavior, rather some agency or freedom that bothers people. So I feel like a lot of the times that I was slut shamed or, called a whore or slut or whatever, it was not because I was having sex with anybody, because I was not. But it was because I was expressing myself somehow. I was being free. I was being playful. And that is something that, you know, we women cannot have, especially back then. I think it's gotten a lot better, but, you know, when I was a kid, it was really not seen with good eyes. So, yeah, and I for a long time when I was a teenager, I was always kind of incorporating all this judgment and thinking, how, you know, why am I giving people this impression? What am I doing wrong? At the same time, I had a lot of fantasies and crazy desires inside of me and a lot of shame about it. But then I would go on the internet and write about it and people would celebrate me for it. So everything was very confusing. But as an adult, I kind of went into this line of work because I wanted to normalize sexuality and female sexuality and be like, you know, it's okay to be horny as a girl and have these thoughts. Because I think if someone had told me that, if someone on the mainstream media was talking about it when I was that age, it would have saved me a lot of misery. And I'm really glad that now, you know, there are so many voices around me doing the same. And I hope this can reach as many people as possible.
Yeah. Lately, I mean, it's something more acceptable. And I hear it from a lot of women that embracing their own pleasure feels like somehow like taboo. I mean, when between the boys, it's always like you joke about it when you're a teenage. You share, or back then you will share out a file or a DVD or something like that. And it's like, that was like very normal. Still something that you would hide from other people, but at least between the boys was like this kind of like, every boy understood what it was about. And I remember when we had like sex education in school, like girls will, when talking about masturbation, they will all say like, ew, like this kind of ick, kind of when talking about that, even though they might have done it or tried it, but they will always put this layer of prudeness.
Yes, I mean, for me, in my personal experience, it was absolutely like that. Boys would, openly talk about jerking off and make crass jokes about it, and at the same time, we women, even though I would say most of us was doing it, we would say, "Oh no, E would never." Oh my God, and I was one of them. I remember that. One of my friends would always use this as kind of a blackmail, like, "Oh, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell everybody that you masturbate," because that would completely ruin my reputation. And she didn't even know that I was or not, but and it would be enough, to just completely ruin my reputation. So when I think I was around 13, my best friend confessed to me that she also did it, and we had like this very relief moment in which we cried and we hugged each other, because I was like, oh my God, like I'm not a complete freak, like someone else does it. And that was a pivotal moment for me. And I think that, it's a shame, because when you're a teenager, there is so many moments of discovery, of playfulness, of curiosity. And that was kind of taken away from me. And then adding to that I am also queer, and I was like having all these weird thoughts of like, oh my God, maybe I like girls. And none of that was addressed in sex education. We just, and it's a missed opportunity, in my opinion.
And well, I have noticed now that you have your earrings.
Yes.
It's a clit, right?
Yes, it is.
So there the camera shows. And has embracing now your identity as a pleasure activist and erotic writer and adult content creator. Has that somehow affected your private life or your personal life, or how do you presented that for the first time to the world that you are sexually open?
Yeah. When I decided to like come out as someone who does this, I had a really long conversation with myself, in which, I decided, okay, this is something that I really need to be happy to feel like I'm being my authentic self. So I'm willing to face any consequences on my professional, familial, and love life. And I think, surprisingly, professionally, that was not an issue. Perhaps because I do live in Berlin. I mean, slowly but surely it became a full-time job, and I feel very respected and embraced by the community. And it's also great to like be surrounded by people who think alike and be like, oh God, it feels so good to find my place in the world. So that has not been an issue. When it comes to my familiar and my love life, with with my family, they don't know so many details. Once I did a radio interview in Brazil, and my dad heard it because, I was on the radio, and he was not a fan.
He shut it down right away. He said, no.
He was like, I think you're exposing yourself. But I was like, look, this is not something that I'm willing to change.
Yeah.
So you're just going to have to accept it. And so far, and he did, because I actually did. He had no option. So we don't talk like that deeply about it. He has kind of a vague idea what I do, and, it's fine. I think that the biggest point of contention for me has been my love life, because, well, it's really fun and exciting to be dating an erotica writer. In the beginning, it's different, when when that would develop into something deeper than just a superficial connection. And I feel like I'm fetishized a lot. A lot of the times I would say, I know this is a harsh term, but I do feel like a lot of times I am kind of dehumanized a little bit. Like people see me as a fantasy. And I understand why that is. I mean, there is a part of myself that, strikes that. But yeah, I've been. There were frustrating instances in which relationships didn't work out because of my work, and that was hurtful. Because I love what I do and it's a big part of who I am. But I also, in those moments, was like, okay, well, that sucks and that really hurts, but I am okay with that.
When you say that they dehumanize or see you as a fantasy, it wasn't like they were just having an idea or an expectation of what you are because of your stories and what you do, and then they saw you only as that and not as a human being that is there.
Yeah, exactly. Not as a full human. They didn't see me as a full human being, I would say. I mean, yeah, of course people are different and, things are complicated, but it has happened to me often that I felt like people were interested in this conquest and the excitement of like, oh, what this just this side of myself, and also because of what I do, and the stigma around it, we're not willing to deepen the relationship any further.
Like the typical thing, oh yeah, I like being with you, but I don't know if I would present you to my parents. Yeah, okay. So you previously said that, well, you identify yourself as a queer person or bisexual. When did you come to that realization? How was that process like?
Okay, so I, at a pretty young age, I had like some innocent experimentations with my girl friends, which I guess it's pretty common. But yeah, that happened at a very young age. And then later in my teenage years, I would say when I was 15, 16, I was like, okay, I started feeling feelings and desires. And I don't know, I realized that I was attracted to girls. And
but also to guys, or how did you know that you were?
Yeah, at the time it was kind of like, well, I had a boyfriend who I was in a pretty serious relationship with, considering that we were both kids, and I broke up that relationship because I was starting to feel like I was interested in girls and I wanted to pursue that, and I thought. It was a painful process. It was like me starting to make out with girls and be like, okay, well, yeah. And then realizing, I thought at the time, okay, so, before it was just a default kind of sexuality. And for a while, I was like, okay, actually, I'm a lesbian. And that was the reality for a few years. So I started my sexual journey with women. My first relationship being an adult was with a woman, and I was pretty content in that. It was a big part of my identity because I was very much into the queer community. So I was like, okay, well, I'm a lesbian. This is what I'm known as.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to touch a man in my life. And that's it. And and I had come out to my mom, like it was a whole dramatic moment. Like it was such a part of me. And then, at some point I started developing feelings for a male friend of mine, which was super fucking confusing because I was like, what is going on? Like, I had this whole process. It was so painful. Like, I had to, and I was scared that I was going to lose the community that I found within, my queer peers.
Just back to being boring straight.
I mean, like I was just like, am I gonna lose all my friends? Like, what does this mean? And yeah, and then it was kind of like a whole moment of like, okay, actually, I am bisexual and I'm attracted to both. But it was not. It took it was a long, maybe a year and a half of like this process of from beginning to have these feelings and being in complete denial because I could not handle that until I was like, okay, no, actually, I am also attracted to guys, and that's a thing.
Yeah. Okay. How was during this whole process, your religious self, your religious conscious inside that might be very there inside of you who was whipping herself when you were younger? Have you overcome that part, that religious guilt, or how do you deal with it? Yeah,
it was a big mess. But I think that in coming in contact with other queer people, also online, in the fan fiction erotic world, like just reading a lot of really weird shit, like queer erotica with everything that you can imagine in kink, and and coming in contact with people that were normalizing that made me feel like, wow, I couldn't really fully act like myself in my normal life, in my family life. I knew that there was people out there like me. So slowly that was a healing process of me to like depart from that guilt and embrace myself. And then when I got into college, I had already done some work through, finding these online communities. And then I went to film school. So it was like pretty queer and all the weirdos together, and they were all very accepting. So that was by the time that I was in the starting my adult life, I was feeling a lot more free. And I also moved away to a different state, so I was really far from my family. So you
can be whoever you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the pleasure gap or orgasm gap. Do you think men are not caring enough about female pleasure?
I think some men definitely don't care enough. I don't think that's all of them. I think what happens with a lot of men is that they don't have the right knowledge to be good lovers. And that's not on them because the sex education that we have is really deficient. It basically sets up people for failure because it teaches them that, sex is penetration. For men to be a good lover, they have to be hard for hours and pump it really hard. And that's actually not at all what good sex is. And we don't have this kind of information in sex education. And then, of course, boys are going to turn to mainstream porn. Most men, I think over 80% of men have reported watching mainstream porn before the age of 18. And personally, I don't have anything against porn. I write for porn. But I think that mainstream porn pushes a lot of very harmful notions, and it's not an accurate representation of what sex should look like, good sex. And, if you don't give people the right information, how the fuck they're going to know? On the other hand, I definitely feel like there are men who don't care and are pretty selfish and bad, and they're just interested in, getting their fair share of it without giving their partners any pleasure or attention. I don't think they're the majority, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think it's more like they don't actually know. They really want to give pleasure to their partner, but they just don't know exactly how.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that they don't know exactly how, but the way that they think they should is completely the opposite of what they should be doing. And it causes them actually a lot of unfair pressure as well. So, for instance, research shows that most men come from penetration in around 6 minutes of penetrative sex. And this is very different from, the idea that we have that you have to be hard for like, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And this puts so much unfair pressure on men as well. So I think a lot of times they think they're doing their best because this is what the information they have been given, when it's actually a frustration fest for all parties involved, sadly.
And right now that also there's more openness and more empowerment from women, and there's a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels who talked about that, and a lot of podcasts of two girls talking about their dates and their sexual experiences. Isn't that something also that puts extra pressure on guys? Because now it's like, oh my God, now I have listened to this podcast of girls and how they make fun of the guys they have been dated or gone to bed with. What if I'm one of those guys? What if my partner or this new girlfriend I just met is going to laugh with all her other friends about my sexual underperformance?
I mean, I don't know. I haven't watched many podcasts that are catty in that sense. I think that on one side, having women talking openly about their sexuality is huge. It's really important for us to be open about our desires, our pleasures, our experience. This is something that we need more of. The cattiness and the battle of the sexes that sometimes I see on the internet, I think that it's divisive. It brings us nowhere. And it's especially not bringing us into the direction of more pleasure for all of us. I think that, sharing about our expectations and our experiences. And sometimes you can be like, well, this happened. Isn't that really frustrating? I think that's fair. But if we want to actually have more fulfilling, pleasurable, satisfying sex lives, then we should be moving towards each other, especially in heterosexual relationships. So exchanging more information, opening the communication channels, that I think is a lot more constructive, even though I understand the appeal of the cattiness and the sensationalism.
Now that we're talking about communication and relationships, example, how can I communicate better my sexual desires and preferences more effectively with my partner?
That's a great question. There are many tools that you can use for that. First of all, I think that being open to listen and learn is the foundation of this for both people involved or more, if you're in a polycule. Because what people have to understand is that there is no one size fits all. People are very different with their preferences, and I think there is a very harmful notion that for you to be good in bed, you should do X, Y, and Z, and it's like this magical ability that you either have it or not.
Yeah.
When actually, what works for one person might not work for the next. So just to give like an example, a practical example of this is that a lot of my friends were for a while talking about how they really like to be on top while having penetration. And they were like, oh yeah, it's amazing. It makes me come in seconds. It's so great. And I was hella confused because I was like, actually, it doesn't feel like that great for me. And I thought always that there was something wrong with me until through my research about clitoral anatomy, I understood that the way that my body is set up, my clitoris is like a little bit further up. So what happens with a lot of people is that they grind their clit against their partner's pelvis when they are on top, and that feels really great. But for me, it doesn't reach because it's too high up, so it doesn't feel like much. And then I was like, oh, that's why. So, just a simple thing, just to give an example of how different bodies work differently. And it's important to not be defensive and actually, take it well. I really was doing this because I really wanted it to feel good, but it didn't. And that's okay. And like be able to be open to receive that kind of feedback. There are apps that can help you maybe if find playful ways to open these subjects. I personally have this one questionnaire that is free to download. That people can, that is like questions to improve your sex life, so you can talk to your partner about sex. And it's basically like, let's take some time, let's maybe crack open a bottle of wine and ask each other questions about our sex lives and what we like. One of the things that one good question to ask, just as an example, it is in the questionnaire, is for you, what was the best time that we had sex and what made it good? And you can pick up from there. Well, that time, I really feel like you gave me attention. You gave attention to that part of my body. I feel like you were being a little bit more dominant, or I was able to explore this, or you did dirty talk. And then you can really, okay, so this is something that works. This is something that you like. How can we bring more of that? Yeah, I would say go slow, look for different resources that can help you with that. And if you are looking to experiment, for instance, with specific kinks, say you want to try a DS dynamic, so dominant submissive, or you want to experiment with shibari or things like that, I think that a great way to go about it is to look for a professional that can help you learn those dynamics and help you navigate them. And it's a really good experience to learn together. So you can look for private coaching. There are workshops that can help you with that. And that's something that I would really recommend. Also, going to sex shops together, or also browsing online if you don't feel comfortable going, because then it opens conversations of like, oh, what is this for? Like, would you like that? How do you think that feels? So, yeah.
I think amorally.de, they opened that or made that very more female friendly as well, because before also sex shops was seen as something like just for pervs, where they will go to a video cabin or stuff like that. And when they launched Amorally, I remember back then they started with the TV ads and everything, and it suddenly looked like something cool, something normal. And I think that helped a lot. And they focus a lot on couple toys and stuff like that, things that you can enjoy with your partner. But the thing is always that when you are into a kink, it's always the thing at what is my partner going to think if I open about those kind of stuff. It's always like this kind of fear around it, right?
Yeah, I think that's natural. And, you have to know that perhaps your partner is not going to be into it. And that's a possibility. And how you can resolve that, can you be without it? Can you perhaps open the possibility of doing that with someone else? One of the questions that I get asked a lot is like, how can I open the subject of pegging with either my girlfriend or my boyfriend? And I think that what I always tell people is like, maybe you can look for an article. I have some articles that I wrote on it, and also stories, and maybe send it to your partners like, oh, I read this article, I found it interesting, have you heard of it before? And then maybe you can get a feel for it.
For the people listening who are not familiar with the term pegging, what is it?
It's true. So pegging is the act of reversing penetrative sex for heterosexual couples. So it's basically the woman using a strap-on to penetrate her male partner anally. It's not the same thing as strap-on sex. Strap-on sex is for all genders. So, for instance, you could have two women having strap-on sex, but pegging is specifically about men and women having that reverse.
Okay.
Yeah.
For example, that is always a hard conversation. I don't know where it starts, if the guy wants to experiment with that or the women wants to experiment with that. Do you know where is the desire more prominent?
I mean, I don't have any data for you, but I have my anecdotal experience
Yeah.
because I do talk a lot about pegging in my work, and because of that, it opens a channel for people to ask me about it.
Mhm.
And I would say the majority of people that ask me about it are men. Men that are interested and they don't know how to approach their partners about it.
For men, it's a really hard thing to even express, even to their partner, because it would be like, she's gonna think I'm gay.
Yeah, it's such a funny thing. First of all, I think it's one thing if you tell your partner, "I would love to try this specific thing," and they say, "I'm not into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go there." That's valid. Mm-hmm. But if they shame you for it, they're not the partner for you. That's my take on it. Yeah. And about the gay point, I mean, it's a basic point, but I would like to make it in a way is that the only thing that makes you gay is being exclusively attracted to men if you are a man. So your gender orientation is about who you're attracted to, not what parts of your body feel good when touched. Those are two separate things. Mm-hmm. And men have their G-spot inside their rectum, so that's the prostate. And then if for a lot of them it feels really good when stimulated, it's very, very pleasurable. It's a very sensitive spot. So feeling pleasure while being touched there means nothing for your sexuality. It just means that your nerves are working correctly because your nerves there are sending signals to your brain and it feels good. And then there is the other part of the conversation that what is the issue with being gay anyway? Yeah. But I think that, I understand the fear and the stigma, and we do live in a homophobic society. But if you want to do butt stuff that says nothing about your gender, if you want to do butt stuff, it says nothing about your sexual orientation.
For the women, the only thing there is that they don't feel any pleasure. Maybe they do.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
there are so many. Well, first, there are different tools that you can use for it. So you have some strap-ons that vibrate, for instance, on the clit, so that feels good. There are strap-ons that are doubled, so you can, while you're penetrating, you're being penetrated as well.
Oh, okay.
So there are different tools that you can use for it. But even if you don't, if you don't have any stimulation on the vulva yourself, I would say, for me personally, it's a beautiful thing to see a man experiencing that much pleasure. It's a moment of connection. It's a moment of vulnerability. It really turns me on to see, a man open up and feel that much. And I think that for both is a moment of discovery and deep intimacy, because when you experience heterosexual sex from your partner's perspective, it makes you better at sex, because then you realize, wow, this is from the other side. This is what it feels like. For instance, the first time that I did it, I was like really appreciative of the physical effort that it takes to penetrate someone, because you have to hold yourself up and you have to have a good rhythm, and it's hard work, and it's something that I hadn't thought about before on the other side.
To coordinate the hips, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Something that, some women, I would say, underestimate the effort of a guy that needs to coordinate their hips while having sex.
It's hard work. Yeah.
The first times, it's always like, oh, damn it. If I knew how to dance, it would be easier, but I don't know how to dance. How am I supposed to do this? Yeah, it's challenging for the role of a man during sex.
Yeah, it's true. And then there are challenges on both sides. So I think that experiencing, of course, it's not the exact same, but experiencing it from the other side can really bring people closer together. So it's something that I really recommend, and it's super pleasurable in my experience. Of course, it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. But I feel like it can be very pleasurable for the woman as well.
You mentioned, of course, this connects a little bit with the thing about, okay, comes to saying, what if I'm gay, or that is taboo, and all of these things and thoughts that we have around sex comes from structures of thoughts that come from generations. And you said that sexuality is also used as a tool of oppression. In which sense did you mean by that?
There are many layers of it, but if you think about the way that women's sexuality is treated, it's demonized, but also it's extremely expected. So we're expected to be very, very sexual and sexy, but we're also expected to pretend that that's not our idea. So our sexuality is a coveted commodity, but it's not supposed to be within our range of autonomy. So it's, always you're going to be judged for being a prude or a slut, or if you are going to have children, if you're not going to have children. This is all within the realm of sexuality and reproductive rights. And these are all used to put you in place in different moments, and there is never a way to find the right way to do things, because it seems impossible that, how can I be not slutty but also sexy and desirable, and this is something that takes away our agency, and just it's a tool for it's a tool of oppression in the way that takes our choices away from us, our choices regarding our bodies, regarding our behavior, our partners. So this is what I mean.
Mm-hmm. But now everything changes, and I think, for example, from the work that you do, and a lot of people are, especially women, are talking more freely about sex and embracing it, talking about pleasure, talking about masturbation, how to have better sex. But on the other hand, for men, has it become different, or is this still the same? I mean, what is the difference for a man about talking openly about sex and being a perv?
What is the difference? Consent?
Mm-hmm.
See, if you are talking about your experiences, your desires, if you're doing reflection, what are your kinks? What would you like to experience? I think this is all very, very valid and healthy. If you are talking about it in a way that weaponizes sexuality to slut shame girls, if you're sharing revenge porn, if you are talking about people that cannot consent to a sexual activity, for instance, minors, that would say perv is it's a hard term, but that would be the realm of it. So if you are, discussing sexuality within boundaries of consent, meaning you're talking about your experiences, with others in a way that respects their dignity and individuality, then I think it's not only good, but absolutely necessary. And I mean, it's different, right? Because for queer men, for instance, they have been talking about their sexuality, because when you're queer, it's not the default. So you have to kind of like think about, oh, wait, but what do I actually like? How do I do this? Okay. And with men, especially straight men who are like the default, they are in a certain way disadvantaged, because them being the default, they don't really have to stop and think like, oh, wait, but what do I like? I've been told that this is how I should have sex, but maybe I want something more. Maybe I want something different. So to have these conversations is super important. And I see it a little bit. I've done recently here in Berlin, I did a Clit for Men seminar because I do this. I have a project that's called I Am the Clitoris with 2 other friends. It's about the clitoral anatomy. Exactly. Follow it on Instagram. And I've been doing a lot of public speaking and workshops around the topic of clitoris for a while now. And in most of these events, I would say like 85% up of the crowd was femme presenting, which is great. I think that we need to learn about our anatomy. I didn't learn about this basic part of my body in sex education, and I came to learn it when I was nearly 30, and that's a shame. However, I think that all men, not only men that have sex with women, all men should learn about this because this is the main sexual organ of half of the population. And we learn in school how trees reproduce. So we should learn about this, even if you are gay and you're never going to have sex with a woman. But especially if you are a man who has sex with women, then you should absolutely be learning about this anatomy, which you most probably haven't been taught about in school. But I had the impression that, because there is this pressure for men to know it all and be very, very performatic in sex, they would not feel comfortable in mixed settings. So I did this event for just men, and it was wonderful to have men who have sex with women. They're talking openly about their experiences. We created a really safe space, and I was like, very hopeful after this. There is a way forward. And when we create space to have these conversations and be vulnerable with each other, that's the path, So I think that absolutely, men should be talking more about it. They should be talking with their friends. They should be talking with their partners. They should be doing podcasts about it. Just being sex positive in the way that, sex is not something that you should use to you should weaponize to attack someone's character or integrity. Be sex positive in the way that sex is an essential, healthy part of our lives, and we should celebrate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that must have been a very interesting seminar.
Yeah, it was. It was really nice.
Yeah. Actually, not until very recently that this whole movement about knowing more about the clitoris, it was more clear for everyone, especially for men, how a clit looked like. It looks like they always say a penis, but inside, because it has similar shape, and they make now even how's it called, kuscheltier, how to call stuffed animals or teddy bears of a clit. Talking still on the topic about we mentioned about consent and dignifying the person and humanizing your sexual partner, but what about submissive sex? How does that goes with feminism, where in some ways the whole dynamic of dominant and submissive breaks a little with our thoughts about equality and respect for each other. And many women that might feel very empowered and very feminist in the outside world, in their sexual private life, they enjoy submissive sex. How does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a valid question, but it's a false dichotomy. So I'm not super experienced in DS dynamics myself in my personal life. It's not really my thing, even though I've dabbled a little bit about it, a little bit in it. But let's talk about kink and what it means in general. So the way that I see kink is a playground, right? I think that kink and sex can be healing like that, in that sense that we can bring our dark, maybe shameful parts and let them play, and while we watch and make sure everything is safe. And that can be an incredibly transformative experience. So, for instance, well, in the first place, you're like, oh, if you are a very feminist woman who, is empowered in your personal life, being submissive in sex might seem counterintuitive. When you look at it, it actually is not. A good example of this is, for instance, for a lot of survivors of sexual assault and rape, playing around with consensual non-consent is actually a healing practice, because you can reclaim that traumatic experience, kind of live it again in a contained environment in which you do have the power, you have the safe word to stop everything, and kind of like go through that again in a way that you were in control. And for, a lot of, I know I have friends who work as dominatrixes, and they have a lot of politician clients who are men that have a lot of power and are surrounded by yes people, and at the end of the day they just want to be told what to do and experience the other side of it. And for us women, there is a lot of shame around our sexuality and around our desires. So to play around with submissiveness and all its facets, because it's a spectrum, can be a way to come in contact with that shame and transform it. Two examples that I can give for this is that, for instance, there was a research that looked around erotica books from the 80s in the US, and there was a really high percentage of rape scenes in those books. And then they looked at a sample, the same size sample from the same time, but with I want to say Swedish books. I could be wrong about the country, but it was definitely a Scandinavian country. And it was significantly less. And the hypothesis for that is that because in the US, extramarital sex is still, and was back then even more, a huge taboo, for women to play around with their fantasies in a scenario that's not their idea, neither their fault, can be, within the safety of just reading a book, not actually experiencing assault, was liberating, was freeing in a way that was like this. I'm playing with a fantasy in which sex is happening, but it's not my fault, it's not my idea, so I can enjoy it. Within the context of a fantasy, not the context of actual assault. And because in this other country, this was not such a taboo, this fantasy didn't have much reason to exist. So there is a lot of reasons why empowered women might be getting into a submissive dynamic, and that can be extremely empowering in the way that they reclaim their agency. Speaking of kink in general and not a DS context, on a personal anecdote, I have, some issues around the fact that, I am a lot of times really attracted to European white men, and who a lot of times fetishize me as this like Latin American, Brazilian, erotic, right? Like, I know it's a lot. But even though I have a lot of frustration around this, it's something that is within me and strikes shame and guilt, but also desire, intense desire. And with an ex-partner of mine, within the context of being in bed, we played around with that, with like me coming into this role of like this little, exotic South American fetish. And it was really healing for me, because while I have a lot of shame around this, it's still there. And to let it exist, within the safety of a kinky scene, you come in contact with that and you give voice to that, but you're still in control of it. It doesn't control you. So I think that, on the surface level, counterintuitive. When you go into the intricacies of kink, then I think it actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm. So it's like in role play, you mean like experimenting different parts of yourselves or fantasies through the role play. You also mentioned consensual, non-consensual sex. Can you expand a little bit? What is that?
Well, on a really great simplification, that's a rape fantasy, right? So you're going to role play rape or assault within the boundaries of kink. So you negotiate beforehand with your partner a safe word, so a word that you're going to say and everything stops. What is the container of that scene? What do you expect to get out of it? What is okay? What is not okay? And then you go into it. So you play with being in a situation of non-consensual sex, but the consent has been previously given. And
this is a hard thing, for example, while sharing your kinks or fantasies. For a woman to share this to her partner must be like very difficult to say, I want to role play this situation, this scenario, because that turns me on. This is a very hard thing to navigate, right?
I mean, it's a lot more common than you think.
Oh, yeah?
And there are many versions of it. So there is, from plain hard to get. For instance, you're with your partner in the club and you kind of like, they come to kiss you and you turn away and you like play a little game. That's a very light version of it. To the extreme of like, someone that I know is a sex worker, and one of the services that he provides is a kidnapping experience.
He gets paid for that.
Yes, he does. And it's basically, something that's arranged, and you're going to experience the full weekend of being kidnapped and having, forced sex that's been previously consented to. So there is a full range in between, those two extremes. I would say yes, and I think that even the shame of it is part of a lot of times what makes it a turn on, because we do have a lot of shame around our sexuality, and it's extremely linked inside. These two things are connected for a lot of women. So, but I think that if you are a woman that has this fantasies, know one, that this is very, very common. Secondly, I would advise you to go online and research it, because there is a lot of resources that you can read about it. And then maybe you can introduce this to your partner with a little bit more of backup. So it's like, I read that this is very common for this and this and this, and it makes me want to try it. And then you can try in different, that can look like just doing that. Let's go to a club and we pretend that we don't know each other and I'll play hard to get. To the point of like, no, I would actually like to experience something more extreme, and always know that you can go to a professional who can teach you tools to do that safely, and so you can have the most fun out of it.
Interesting. I've heard, I think in another podcast, about consensual, non-consensual sex parties. And I thought, okay, that's very, very niche, but very, somehow also dangerous.
Yeah, could be dangerous. There is no... You can't guarantee that sex is not going to be triggering or traumatizing. Sometimes it will be, even if you have all the safety measures in place. And it's not only about kinky sex. But I would say it has even less risk of being dangerous, because people that are in a context like that, they have, been through a whole thought process of like, this is what I would like to experience. And usually when this is organized, this is discussed before. What are all the boundaries? What does that involve? And you have people, if you have an awareness, their team, like there is a lot of safety measures in place. While, play parties that it's just like free for all and everybody goes in there and there's a lot of substance use as well and not enough safety measures in place, I think that would be more dangerous, in my opinion.
I want to get into the topic of some substances in a bit. But about kinks, so seems that they all come from a place of shame. Everything that is somehow, or some stuff that are for you a bit shameful, you transform them in a sexual fantasy or a kink. It seems like.
Yes, and I mean, shame is can be one of the drivers behind kink, but there are many other drivers, and there is not a definitive answer to that. It's complex, right? There is lots of layers, and it's the social context, the way that you were introduced to sex, how your body composition works, and how you experience physical pleasure, and also shame and things that you can that you canalize into your sexuality. So there is a lot of aspects to it, but shame is a common one.
And what is the difference with the fetish?
So the fetish refers to a specific object or a specific body part that is a sexual fixation or an object of desire. And kink is this very broad spectrum of non-conventional sexual practices, which is super, what is non-conventional? That's very different for everyone. And then so fetish is under the umbrella of kink in that sense.
Are men more into fetishism than women? Or what's your impression?
Not at all. My impression is that, it's a wide spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wonder, because they're more known, for example, foot fetish or latex. Well, okay, a lot of women are also into latex.
Yeah.
But like high heels, leather, BDSM, a lot of stuff like I always associate them like with preference from men, but I don't have so much knowledge about what other fetishes there exist for women.
Yeah, I mean, there are women who are really into latex. There are women who are really into feet or hands or other body parts, specific body parts, and they're more unusual or less common fetishes. For instance, there are people that are sexually turned on by balloons and things that are not inherently sexual. And it's maybe women tend to talk less about less conventional sexual preferences because we tend to be shamed for it. But in the circuits that I am into, because I live in this really sex-positive bubble in which I forget what the real world looks like, there is all kinds of people who are into all kinds of things. And that's something like, if you are listening to this and you have like an unusual, unconventional practice that you think that you're the only one who's into it and you're never going to find someone to do it with, trust me, there is someone out there who also likes it.
Yeah. Actually, for example, lately it's very well known that foot fetish is like out there and still being seen as something for the conventional people or more conservative people, like something like weird. But I have this theory that is not, there are a lot of stuff that are actually weird if you think them from a outsider perspective. For example, the fixation for many men on breast or on the ass it's also like a part of the body that are like, why are you sexualizing those parts, right? From the ass is like either you sit on it or you pull from it. Why are you sexualizing it? The boobs is like for breastfeeding. So why are you sexualizing them? So my theory is that there's a very large group of men who are into feet as well as men that are into breast or the ass. Just that since the foot fetish is like very taboo, you don't see a lot of them because they will not very openly say, I'm into the feet of a woman. It's more accepted to say, I'm into the ass or the breast.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't know. I've never personally dated anyone who likes feet because I have really ugly feet, so that would not work. And I also don't like my feet touched. But I would say, I don't know, it's pretty common. But again, like, I think I'm a little bit out of touch in that sense because I'm so much into, this little
everything.
kink bubble, and everyone around me is so open about their preferences that, foot fetish is something that is quite common. I would say that, if you are in a conservative bubble and it's not even about the foot or whatever it is that you're into, is about being sex negative and just seeing anything that is outside of the realm of heterosexual sex, sometimes in extreme cases only for reproductive reasons, as something that's deviant. And that's a sex negative notion. And I think it's more about that than, what specific fetishes.
I mean, Berlin, as you said, you're surrounded here by a large community, and actually the city itself is very open. You have places like the Kit Kat Club, which now is like very mainstream. Everyone has been there, even though they are not into anything kinky. Or are you a regular
in Kit Kat?
Yeah.
What is a regular? Actually, no. Because I don't like the music very much. I'm not very into techno, which is sad as someone that lives in Berlin. So I enjoy going to Kit Kat. Not all the parties, not all the events, but it just in general because the music is not really my thing. Nowadays, I would prefer to go to other events in either other clubs or private settings that are a little bit more my thing. I'm also lately in a phase of like enjoying sex positive spaces that are more substance free. But there was a phase of my life that I was really into going to Kit Kat frequently.
You got addicted to it.
It was fun. And I still like it, but
how do you play tango on Saturdays?
Yes, and I've heard of that. I only found this out recently, and I actually would like to do that. I haven't done that yet.
Because in that room, if you're not into techno, at least you can listen to, I think like for a couple hours, they put like tango and then like techno tango. I don't know how is it called. Like
they do even a workshop. Yeah.
And they do classes and
that's
exactly.
nice.
So that's a different.
It's a different vibe. Yeah.
And not the typical Berlin techno for people who's not into that music. And also about the substances. I mean, there's in places or in sex positive parties, there's a lot of consume of substances. And how ethical is it to have sex or to do any kind of sexual act under the effects of substances? Is like the problem of, can you really consent? Isn't like being like drunk. When someone is drunk, the person cannot really consent, and that's unethical.
Yeah, that's a very difficult conversation. I'm not like going to say that you should only have sober sex, or I don't believe that. However, as someone who has, been to a lot of parties and it was not exactly substance free, and I'm in the more sober, curious phase of my life. I would say that it's when it comes to play spaces, being able to be fully into your consciousness is really important. It's really important to me personally. So let's say this. I will say from my personal experience, because everyone's different, and I trust that, people can make these decisions for themselves. But for me personally, I feel like it's really important for me to be able to check within myself whether or not I want to do something to be sober. I like to remember things the next day, not only because it's nice, but also because it's like sometimes in group settings, there are situations that are very nuanced. Mm-hmm. And to not remember exactly what happened because you were on something is a really terrible feeling. And I enjoy the sensation of having sex in play spaces while sober, because I'm more present in my body. It was not always like that. I'm a very socially anxious person, so I would use alcohol, for instance, as a way to kind of like bypass that anxiety. But I feel like that has led me to situations, and nothing terrible happened, but led me to situations that were not great. Sometimes. And I also didn't enjoy it as much because I wasn't as fully present. So I really enjoy going to places where I am sober and everyone else is sober, because I've also been to play spaces in which I made a decision, especially if I go, for instance, to a play party that is new to me. I don't know the space. I don't know the people that well, or then I always make this decision. It's like, I'm going to go through this sober because I want to be able to really be present within myself. But it has happened in situations that I was sober, but people around me were not sober. And that was, I felt like it was a lot of work for me to like have to navigate the space with people that were on whatever, and like a lot of them were uncalibrated with it. So like having to navigate that just put an added strain on my experience. And going to spaces in which people are sober and that's a requirement for the play space, I feel like it makes my personal experience a lot more enjoyable. I think that while in Berlin we have like a really heavy substance drug culture, I would say. It's a heavy word to use, but I think it's accurate. I also see a movement moving into the direction of sober curiosity, which is something that makes me very excited. So there was recently a lunchbox candy event, which was a famous party in Berlin that did a sober event, and I think that's fantastic. At Whole Festival, for instance, there was a sober curious space, and I see these things popping up more and more, and it makes me really happy because, well, it's not a moralist, it's like, oh, you should never have sex on substances, but it's nice to also have the other option and start this conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny, this kind of new names, sober curious. But it sounds good. I mean, I have heard since I think a couple of years ago about sober parties, and then you just drink something without alcohol. Also, the naked tea party, I think it's also a sober party, isn't it?
For most of their events, it is. Yeah, in Sisyphus, because people are in the club, so then they can't control that, I think. But I really love it. It's such a nice space, because at first we were like, oh my God, it's going to be really hard to be naked and not have, alcohol or something else to escape into.
Rather you have hot tea and you can burn yourself.
Yeah, and then you're like, but then everybody else is like that, and then it's like, well, it's nerve-wracking, but it's a nice shared experience. I mean, I'm some years ago, if you told me, oh, you're going to go to sober parties, I would have been like, what? And so it's a really surprising thing for me to be saying it, but I feel like I have so much fun in those spaces.
Yeah.
There's nothing missing for me.
I actually, and also, for example, I had a friend and he went to a party, to the Kit Kat. And also one of his experience was not the best because he said, well, I'm dancing with a girl. I think she's into me. But then I see that, then we go to a corner, we start kissing, and then somehow she changes. It's when the effect of the substance goes away, and then she suddenly feels tired and goes and never comes back. And then he told me like it felt like she was just, I don't know, under the substance, and she felt attractive to me because of, I don't know what she was feeling or imagining. After the effect was gone, then I was not sure if she was into me or not. Maybe she was not into me at all. Maybe she will not remember anything. So it felt like very empty in that sense. And I thought like, hey, I totally get that, because if the person is just into you because they're just like in another world, they cannot control themselves, then I don't know, it's something missing there.
Yeah, maybe not everyone would agree. Personally, I definitely agree.
And what do you think that most people misunderstand about being kinky in Berlin?
Oof. I think that there is this idea of what kink looks like, and especially in Berlin, that's true. It's like this latex, Kit Kat, BDSM, hard play. And combined a lot of times with a lot of drugs. And I feel like that can be absolutely a side of kink. And if you are into that and it brings you joy, more power to you. That's not all that kink is. And I think we miss out when we reduce kink to that. And it's also, I think that for a lot of people, they're like, well, I would like to experiment with my sexuality, but I am not into that version of it. But because I feel it's so closed off, and, you know, if I'm not into that, then I'm not kinky, then I'm not even going to dip my toes in. Yeah. And I think that's a shame. It's a missed opportunity. I think it's getting better, but I definitely think that there is kind of like a monolith way of looking at kink here in Berlin. And I think that sexuality is such a colorful experience. I think that we should have that and other things as well. And I am seeing a little bit of that popping here and there, and I would like to see more.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's true. Everything is like some sort of connected to that, like leather and techno somehow. But there's some like this hedonistic kind of movement, like more colorful, or more like this kind of like being a bit retro, like 60s, 70s style of community, and
like hippie kind of. Yeah.
I think you also have been in some party like that in Leipzig.
Hedone.
Yeah. Is that kind of vibe, or?
Hedone is a festival, is a sex positive festival, and I would say they call themselves conscious as well. So there is a lot of tantra and spirituality brought into it. I was there twice, bringing 2 workshops into it. So one was the erotica writing workshop, and the other was a clitoral pleasure workshop. And it's, you know, very fluffy, very light colors, glitter, flowers, the kind of like sensual, hedonistic with tantra and spirituality mixed in, which is also a very fun side of it. And I feel like the same way that the leather Kit Kat vibe is not for everyone, maybe that hippie spirituality it might not be for everyone, but it's great, you know, that it also exists, and it's a different approach to it. So so there is that, and there is also some play parties that are more queer friendly, and not queer friendly, they are queer play parties that are colorful and kind of like fun and playful, and I also really like that. And it's different sides of it, and I'm really glad that it's coming more towards that direction of plurality. Jesus. But hedone is not German. It happens in different countries. I think it started in Paris.
Okay.
And it happens in different countries, and it's not, it doesn't come from the Berlin sex positive scene. And I think that is also one of the reasons why it has a different feel to it.
Yeah. Okay, if it comes from Paris, then it becomes more like, I mean, I saw the pictures. They do it like in a castle or something like that.
Yes, it's really like a very fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about modern era AI in the adult sex industry. So you recently sent an open letter to the EU Commission.
Mm-hmm.
On behalf of a lot of your peers in the adult content industry, can you tell me a bit about what is in that letter and why it's so important to you?
Yeah. So that letter was a culmination of a lot of work within the initiative that's called Open Mind AI. And this initiative is under the umbrella of the Digital Intimacy Coalition. And basically, it started because last year I hosted a workshop at the Sex Tech conference, which is a big conference for the sex tech stakeholders. And it was about the future of adult content creation. And inevitably, we talked about AI. And in that room, we realized that we're now having a unique opportunity as an industry because AI is still being regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a chance that we can be involved in the discussions for this regulation. So we can have a say in it. And after that, I took it upon myself to kind of like maybe it's a very diverse initiative with so many players inside of it from different sides of the spectrum. So sex workers, sex tech, sexual health, sex education. And it's really important that we are a horizontal organization. So we don't differentiate between good adult contents like sex tech and, the cool sex toys for couples and porn. And it's important that we're all in this together because I think we're stronger together. And then I came together with Paulita Papel from Lustry, which is an ethical porn platform, and we joined forces to push it. And then we came into the Digital Intimacy Coalition. That is a coalition that has, tentacles in different areas of our intimate lives and how that intersects with the digital landscape. So, for instance, dating apps and sex worker alliances and so on and so forth. And Open Mind AI is now a branch of that is in charge of AI and adult content. And this open letter that we sent last month is basically because the EU has a designated commission. The EU Commission has a designated task force in charge of the discussions around regulation of AI. And they invite representatives of civil society and other organizations to give their input on that. And that, varies from a range of, so how AI will impact military, for instance, and things like that. And the open letter is basically saying, hi, we are an industry and we want to be in the discussions too, because inevitably adult content and AI are linked. People are going to use this technology, are already using this technology for spicy content. More obviously, in the press is the case of deep fake pornography, but there is also other uses, which is So AI digital companions, so chatbots, that people can have digital sex with. And there is the possibility of VR and AI with spicy content. So there is a lot of it that is connected to adult content.
I mean, they say that most of the advances in technology were always adopted like largely by the auto industry. Like they say that the DVD was a big success because of the auto industry.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm a firm believer in that. Like ever since we were doing writing and rock paintings, every time that we find a new technology or a new way to communicate, we're basically creating smut. And I personally believe that one of the biggest drivers behind technological advancement is our need to express our fantasies. So there is the legend that VHS, was also created for porn, and there is that
VHS. I don't know if it was DVD.
Yeah, DVD, and also
that VHS won the battle against Beta because of the porn industry.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, internet and porn are very linked. Yeah. There is that famous story that Google Images was created because Jennifer Lopez went to maybe a Grammy ceremony, I could be wrong, or VMAs, in a very low-cut dress that was very sexy. And people were looking for it so much that it caused Google to create Google Images. So, people could see Jennifer Lopez looking sexy. So, these two things are linked. There is a drive there. People are already using AI for spicy content of all kinds. And we are the experts. We are the stakeholders. We, as the initiative, we know exactly what people are looking for, how this is used, what are the struggles, where are the pain points, and we want to inform our policymakers about it so they can take this into consideration while regulating AI, because we fear that on one side, there is this extreme censorship, which is, AI models adopting the kind of meta social media approach to adult content, which is there is no differentiation between sex education or porn or whatever. Like, let's censor everything and that's it. That's the approach. I think that is it squashes a lot of important conversations. It harms those who are the most vulnerable. So the sex workers, the creators, and it removes an important part of our lives from this technology that is now essential to all of us. So, for instance, Open AI is looking to change that, but currently the model that we have in ChatGPT is that you can't do anything that is remotely close to sexual education. So for me, because it has already flagged me as a naughty user, if I am doing something with the CLED project, which is strictly sex education.
Right. Help me to correct the grammar mistakes on my text.
Yeah, exactly. And then, there is the word clip there, content strike. If I have, a scene that I have to have a summary of that scene of an erotic text, but there is nothing actually spicy there, it's just characters kissing, content strike. So I feel like that's a bit defeating. Like, aren't we all adults or not? And we need to define what are the limitations. Personally, this is something that I really believe in. We need to define, it's a difficult conversation to have, but we need to define what is porn, what is erotic art, what is sex education, and what are the limits between those. And on the other hand, if you have all this censorship, we squash it down, then you have like the kind of like deeper, darker world in which everything is allowed. And that, is what we see with AI-enabled intimate abuse, intimate image abuse. So also known as deepfake porn, and the coordinated attacks to tarnish people's reputations, using these generated porn images that, take a lot of times, for instance, the face of a celebrity or someone that you don't like and put on the body of a porn performer, and that is used to destroy that person's life. And it's something that people may not realize is that the porn performer is also being victimized, not only in their human integrity of like having their body being exposed in a way that they didn't consent to, but they are also being affected in their livelihood, because if they are a poor performer, that's how they pay their bills. And if that image is being ripped off, they are not being compensated for it. So there is all of this permissiveness, and that's also dangerous, right? So what we want with Open Mind AI and what we're hoping to have with this dialogue with our policymakers is to find a way that we can have a middle ground that is going to be safer and healthier for the creators and the users. And we're looking to have, it's basically 3 goals. So first is representation. So to have us as an industry as the adult industry to be represented in law and to be represented within these discussions. It's collaboration. So we offer our unique perspective or unique insight. We know what people are typing into the search bar. And we also want to educate not only policymakers, but also the general public about how we can use AI to create a lot of spicy content and have a lot of fun, but in an ethical way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the pace that technology is advancing is like hard to expect what you can do for example, what deep fakes can do. I mean, there was a thing about Taylor Swift on Twitter, and that raised a lot of attention. Okay, this is what can happen. And it is something that is not that difficult, and the technology does it very well. We have one episode, I think it was one of our first episodes. We did it with someone that she didn't want to show her face in the podcast. So yeah, we did a face swap. Deep fake sounds very creepy. We did a face swap, and the quality is like impressively good. You wouldn't notice, just if you really look very closely, you will see, okay, that's something weird with the face. And then it's like, okay, it's AI. We disclosed that the face was swapped with AI, but that this technology is out there and is so easy to make, or like easy, quote unquote, is like sort of concerning.
Yeah.
You said you did it with Paulita Papel. Ah, cool. You know her. I want to have her also on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I mean she'll have a lot of very interesting insight, that's for sure.
Yeah. What is something you personally find very pleasurable that others might find intimidating or scary to try?
Oh, my God. Disclosing my personal kinks. I found out maybe like 6 years ago that I have a spit kink.
A what?
A spit kink.
Oh.
And that was I was with a partner and they were into it. And then I realized that I was really into it as well. And I mean, it's not that uncommon, but I understand like that some people might be a little bit repulsed by it. But yeah, I find it very pleasurable. And I've had, partners that were like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. I don't like it on myself. I'm not going to do it to you. And I think that's very fair. Yeah. And I've had partners who were like, I don't want you to do it to me, but I'm fine with doing it to you. And that's great. And I've also had partners who were happy to be on both sides of it. Yeah, I guess it's not that uncommon, but...
What is your favorite story that you have written?
Nice question. I mean, I have a lot of stories that I like for different reasons, but currently my favorite story is one that is going to be launched on the upcoming 14th of February. I'm publishing it with the Women Writing Berlin Lab. And we're actually doing a little sweet release party that is going to be a reading of it. It's a short story, a short erotic story. Last year, I was in Colombia for 3 months after a personal crisis with Berlin and life and I had a lot of life-changing experiences there. And this story is about one of them, and it's about kind of like refinding yourself through someone else. And it's very special to me because I think that I managed to represent a pivotal moment in my life and to capture the feeling, the sensualness, the sense of adventure and excitement and nervousness that came with all of it. And I'm very proud of it. So currently, I would say that's my favorite. The name is Brausepulver.
Brausepulver.
Yeah. So the in Germany there is this kind of powdered juice, and kids like to eat it, just the powder, and it's important to the story. So that's why that's the title, and currently it's my favorite. I have another one that I quite like as well, which is called Noxious. It's a short novel. It's an ebook. This one was written after I had gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship that was very hard for me, and it was kind of like a way for me to process and heal from it. And it's a horror erotica story in which a girl is in a relationship with a man whose semen is poisonous. So every time that they have sex, she gets sicker and weaker. And it was kind of like a representation of, that slowly but surely wearing down of abuse, of what an abusive relationship does. And that was a hard one. It's dark, but it's also, I'm proud of it because I managed to resignify something that was hard for me to go through.
It's very different. I think how erotica is written by women than when it's written by men. It has more like substance, more mystery. I have a feeling more, I don't know. And also, it became very open for women to explore more erotic literature.
Pardon?
after the famous book 50 Shades of Grey.
Of course.
Yeah. But you were already before that very into it. But did you notice more interest, for example, from women in your literature after that book was released?
Funnily enough, my audience is pretty half and half, and a lot of men really like reading my stuff as well. So it's not, definitely not only women.
Okay.
But 50 Shades of Grey, not everybody knows this, but it was initially a Twilight fanfiction that was written into, I think it was a Wattpad forum. And interestingly, I was never a Twilight fan, nothing against it. It's just like I'm a little bit too old for Twilight. It came after my time. But it came from the same corner of the internet that got me initiated on erotica, which is fan fiction online, written by mostly women / non-binary. It's a queer femme bubble, so to speak. And yeah, so 50 Shades of Grey came from that same little corner of the internet, and it brought that, which is already like my people and what I was doing, into the mainstream. And I mean, I have, of course, many thoughts on 50 Shades of Grey, but definitely it normalized it, and I think that is something that I'm grateful for, because now people are more educated in what erotica is and what it means, even though it also brought a lot of stereotypes that are a bit harmful, I think. But yeah, I would say that, you know, even if I have my qualms with the series, it's great that it brought more knowledge about erotica.
Yeah, for sure. Did you watch the series Friends?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that there's a scene where Rachel is reading an erotic book, and it's like such a taboo that they made fun about it in the series?
Don't remember. Like I remember it very not so much.
She's reading a book, and I think Joey finds it, and then he starts to make fun and say, "Oh, Rachel likes porn," and he tries to dress up like a vicar or something like that. He doesn't even understand it. And for example, back then when that was film, that was still like a very big taboo. It's a joke that nowadays will not work at all, because we'll be like, yeah, what's the big thing about it? What's the big deal about it, right?
Yeah. It's funny because we've always written porn. So the first love poem, which is a poem that I love, it's called Istanbul 2461, is dubbed the first love poem, but I would say it's the first erotic poem. So it's 4,000 years old. It was written on a Sumeric tablet and found in the region that was the Mesopotamia. And it's extremely erotic. And not only it's written from the perspective of a woman. We don't know who actually wrote it, but it is very sexy and written from the perspective of a woman who is anticipating her wedding night and all the things that she's going to do with her future husband. It's beautiful. And so we've been writing it for a really long time. And then, you know, how you have Maki de Sade, who wrote 120 Days of Sodom, who, you know, it was a book so scandalous that landed him in jail. So we have a long tradition of written porn, and it's funny that, you know, it took us so long to have it be a little bit more mainstream, but it's always been there, lurking in the corners. However, I will say, for instance, if you go into Amazon Books, and there is a lot of censorship around porn, erotica books on Amazon as well.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you go there, like, to look for erotica books, it's kind of like you're going into the basement of the internet. It makes you feel kind of like I'm doing something wrong. So I still feel like to this day there is a big differentiation between high class, serious literature and erotica, which is like this kind of like dirty, stigmatized, like less than. And this is one of the reasons it took me so long to come out as an erotic writer, because I wanted to be taken seriously as a writer. And I thought that if people knew that I was writing about sex, they would not take me as seriously. And I think that is something that we still have to overcome. This idea that is second-class literature, it's not well written, it's not important, it's not art. And I personally do not. I think that, you know, there is no differentiation there. And I would say that that's the next step, to recognize erotica as literature, as a form of art, as valid, as important as any other.
That was good. Well said. To close, I have some flash questions. Top 3 favorite books?
Fuck. Oh my God, I don't know. Okay. At this very moment of my life, because this changes, I would say 100 Years of Solitude. I would say, oh my God, this is so hard. Álbum de Família, which is actually a play by Nelson Rodrigues, which is a Brazilian author. And okay, in homage to my teenage self, I would say that I really like The Mists of Avalon. I still really like that book.
Which one?
The Mists of Avalon. So
okay.
Yeah.
What are you optimizing for?
I am very big on mental health these days, but I'm also like really working on optimizing, treating myself with more love and accepting that I deserve good things. It's a big one for me at the moment.
What will feel great if it happens?
So many things. If I can work with what I love in the internet, in social media, without fear of censorship, of being shadow banned, of having my account taken away from me, just have that fear removed from my life.
Is it something constantly?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's next?
Funny that you ask. So, actually, there's something very, very exciting coming up. That next week we have Porn Film Festival here in Berlin, and I'm going to be a part of a panel that's happening as a part of the adult industry only, which is an event within the Porn Film Festival. And we are going to be talking about the future and tech and AI and all of these subjects that, open mind AI is concerning. And we're going to have, for the first time, a member of the EU Commission attend a porn event.
Okay.
So I'm going to be on that panel, and I'm very, very excited to see this opening of a dialogue between policymakers and us as an industry. So that's something that I am very excited about. And I think that also for the next ventures, definitely working more to expand to other countries and maybe even other continents with my work, and kind of like bring it to other crowds as well.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Congratulations. Ana Pimenta Citrica. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. It's the Guten Tag